So today I'm going to be talking about abortion. And I'm not going to be spending time in this video talking about why I'm in favor of abortion. If that's something, however, you'd like to see in a future video, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to make the video in the future. But for now, let it be sufficient to say that I am very much in favor of a person's right to have an abortion. And what I'd rather cover in this video is the type of restrictions and practices that are put into play by a lot of states to kind of undermine the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision and try to make it as difficult as possible for people to get access to an abortion, if not downright shame them. And just let people know and remind people how difficult it has become over the years to receive that care without any sort of restrictions or state imposed problems added to the process because it has gotten really bad out there. And one of the main reasons I'm bringing that up now is that Ohio just passed a law where Governor DeWine signed this Senate Bill 27 into law that requires a zygote blastocyte embryo or fetus from a surgical abortion to be buried or cremated, and that any person who obtains said abortion in Ohio would have to basically make some sort of decision on the final disposition of the fetal remains. So either a burial or a cremation, and the cremated ashes would have to either be properly scattered or buried. And if the person doesn't do it, it is on the clinic that performed the abortion to set all this up, and if they don't, there is the possibility of a $1,000 fine or up to 6 months in prison and first-degree misdemeanor charges. So this law was put forward, of course, at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, state legislatures and the federal government, usually through the omnibus bill, have a tendency to put forward these type of laws at the end and kind of sneak them past while there might not be a full session, or there might be just the ability to slide some of these positions through. But this particular law being passed is not really done to actually protect anybody. It's mostly done to make it as difficult as possible for a person to obtain an abortion and to provide more financial burden on clinics that perform abortions so that it is, again, more difficult to obtain. The more you can financially tax or limit the institutions that provide this medical care, it becomes more difficult and feasible for these organizations to exist. And if you can provide more of a taxing experience and having to add more shaming type situations onto people who go through with abortions, the more difficult it is for people to then want to obtain it, whether it's, for their benefit or not. And so it effectively erases some ability for people to choose if they actually want this type of procedure. And so this basically comes where you have a situation in the United States right now where clinics are not available in a good number of states, and furthermore, the states that do have it require very restrictive, not necessarily medically necessary procedures before going through with an abortion. So there have been, since 1973 and Roe v. Wade being upheld in the way that it was and allowing for abortion rights to exist in the United States, approximately 1,100 laws passed by states trying to circumvent this particular federal law. 24 states have imposed medically unnecessary restrictions on the provisions of abortion care, and certain states have declined in the number of abortion clinics down to the point where it's downright near impossible if you live in certain parts of the state to get access to it. So in Arkansas, there's 3. In Kentucky, there's 1. In Louisiana, there's 3. In Mississippi, there is 1. In Missouri, there is 2. And in Ohio, there is down to 10. And these are accurate as of 2018. And what happens in these type of situations is that if you happen to live outside of the area that a clinic is, you might have to drive an hour or two to get to the facility. And once you're at the facility, because there are a limited number of them, you're often met with protesters. And I had considered showing a video of what this is like, but I feel like there's no real benefit to that because it's just hard to watch. But it's the type of situation where oftentimes people that work at the clinic have to escort people in as people are talking about these very God-fearing situations, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs about how the person is a murderer and is going through all this stuff. So not only are protesters allowed to harass people outside trying to get into the facilities, because it's a limited number, protesters can now target these particular facilities and specifically target the people that are trying to get access to them. Furthermore, that's when a person has to drive multiple hours to get to a facility, and often the people who are the most poor can't take time off for work because of these type of situations where they can't afford care in the first place. On top of restricting medical care across the situation, and Republicans, of course, the ones who tend to want these kind of pro-life positions, are the ones restricting medical care and making it even more difficult to get access to this type of care in the first place, let alone any other care. You know, if we had a system like Medicare for All in place, this would be a lot harder to put forward. But the more you restrict medical care in general, the more people's bodies are policed. And so that's what it takes to get into a facility. And once you're there, I want to read a clip, or a passage rather, that talks about what one person has experienced there, just as an anecdote to represent kind of the whole of the experience of what it might feel like to actually walk into a clinic like this. So we have an article from 2019, December, so, a little over a year ago, that says, what it's like to endure a forced ultrasound before your abortion. And so just reading this particular passage, at the clinic, they immediately separated me from my boyfriend. It made me watch a video by myself on what abortion was about. They gave me a couple of opportunities to say I didn't want it. For example, they asked me if I was being coerced. I remember thinking, I really wish my boyfriend were here sitting with me. Then they had me change into a hospital gown and took me into this holding area for all the women having abortions that day. We were all sitting there on bench seats, wearing socks and hospital gowns. I just wanted to have my abortion. They left us in that room for 4 hours. Finally, it was my turn. They brought me back into this darkened room and said, we cannot give you your pain medicine until we've done the other stuff. And they performed an ultrasound. For me, it was an external ultrasound. I lay there, and they took the ultrasound wand and rubbed it across my belly. I had no idea why any of this was happening. I was trying not to look at the ultrasound, and the practitioner said to me, ma'am, you're going to need to look at this, and we're going to have to turn the volume up on it. And it goes on and on and on about how the person felt shamed, and how the person was frustrated because they didn't even know that the ultrasound was a requirement, and they didn't know any of the details about it, and how essentially this was just a deeply confusing section of the experience for them to go into all this. And what this particular piece is about shame, about making it as difficult as possible. To sit there and literally ask you, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you really sure? And never quite trusting the perspective of a person going in for an abortion to actually know what they want and what they need. And this isn't the doctor's choice. None of this is medically necessary. This is the process that a person going into this is forced into doing by the state. Because if they don't, they're technically, violating all these state regulations that have been imposed by these very detrimental laws that make it that much more difficult. So one, you have to find a way to get to the clinic. If one exists in, your state in a reasonable distance to you, especially if you're poor. Then you have to deal with harassment outside. Once you're inside, you have to deal with shaming and all sorts of unnecessary medical procedures. Finally, you get the procedure. And then you're put in a place where now in Ohio, you have to make a decision whether or not this unborn bunch of cells is going to be cremated or buried. And if either you or the clinic doesn't actually take the steps to do this, you're now put in a place where you've been charged with a misdemeanor and possible jail time. And all of this is just done to circumvent Roe v. Wade, to circumvent the fact that this is technically a legal right still in this country. And to make matters worse, Governor DeWine, this is not his first show in terms of trying to stop abortion in this country. Or in his state, rather. But in the country in general, I'm sure. He last, I guess 2 years ago now, with 2019, passed a bill, or put forward signed a bill into law that was known as a heartbeat law. And what heartbeat laws are is laws that basically state that when a heartbeat is able to be heard on an ultrasound, that is when it is illegal for a state to allow for an abortion. Now, this has been overturned by the federal courts in pretty much every state that's tried to pass one of these. These are the states that have done it. You can take a look at it yourself. I'm not going to sit here and list them all off, but the federal courts have blocked it in all but Tennessee. And basically, if Roe v. Wade were to ever be overturned, this is where we'd be sitting in these states in terms of getting an abortion. And the biggest issue is that the heartbeat can form as early as 6 weeks, which is often too early for someone to even realize that they're pregnant. So if you're in this particular situation and you find out you're pregnant and you go in, there's a good chance that heartbeat's already there, effectively making abortion completely invalid as an option and procedure. Now, that's the main reason why the federal courts have blocked a lot of these. But with Amy Coney Barrett being someone on the bench right now and the conservative justice being in the position that they are, there's every possibility that Roe v. Wade might be overturned in the next coming years. And at the end of the day, there is really nothing that can be done in terms of a legal sense except the will of the Supreme Court. But even without the Supreme Court stepping in, all of these states have been constantly pushing and chipping away at the law to make it more and more difficult for a person to receive an abortion as proper medical care. And as we know, across the board, generally speaking, people who get them are not typically in a place to regret it years later. They can make a much healthier decision later in life, whether to have a child or not to have a child. There's generally speaking a perspective that anyone who goes through with this has made the right decision in their lives. And we should be respecting that. We should be respecting that decision. And, it's always funny to me that the perspective of Republicans, like Mike DeWine, is always this idea that the government should protect and uphold life, to hold it in regard from beginning to end. And what we know and what we've always experienced is that the Republican Party is always the main one putting out there that we should be going into wars, killing people in other countries, that they're the ones who should be causing all sorts of traumatic issues within the United States, denying people access to money, resources, and stimulus, constantly putting restrictions on people's lives in order to actually benefit themselves, constantly restricting the human condition, and yet they want to talk about the right to life. It's this kind of hypocrisy that has always made the Republican Party an absolute joke in my eyes. They are not interested in anything but policing a certain type of body, policing a certain type of perspective, and making sure essentially that women are not able to just be free with their sexuality and can constantly put under restrictive gender norms. That people who are able to get pregnant can constantly be put into positions where they are unable to be sexually liberated. This is all they care about. It is about putting people back in their place. It has nothing to do with protecting life. And at the end of the day, this kind of policy needs to be restricted and stopped. You need to make it so that people can get abortions because, first of all, that's the law right now with Roe v. Wade. And second of all, the more they chip away at this, the more they put damage on this, the harder it is for people to get access to necessary medical health care. And the alternative will always be more dangerous. This should be available. This should be accessible for everyone who needs it. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.